Great. This chapter is called Bean's Backyard. If you remember in the last chapter, they crossed over, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 backyards until they got to Bean's backyard. "You peek over, see if Nancy's there," said Bean. "She might be in the yard looking for me." Ivy nodded and stood up. She could just see over the fence. "I don't see anyone," she said. "Then they're probably out looking for me," said Bean. She pictured her mom and Nancy with worried faces. "I've been gone a long time." "Let's go get the worms," said Ivy, pulling herself to the fence. Bean's backyard was a big rectangle. There was a nice part with flowers and neat grass. Then there was the messy part with lumpy grass and a trampoline and a playhouse that Bean had had since she was little. She could barely fit inside it anymore. There was stuff lying all over the messy part: hula hoops, balls, arrows, shovels, buckets, and a broken stilt. Bean had really hurt herself that time. The worms were in the messy part and over next to the playhouse where the ground was wet. Ivy and Bean grabbed shovels and a bucket and got to work. At first there was a lot of mud. Then there was mud and a few worms. But the more they dug, the more worms they found. 6, 10, 13 worms. The worms oozed and curled through the mud. Bean liked the way they were fat one second and stretched out and skinny the next. She and Ivy dug deeper and deeper until they had made a big muddy pit in the ground. It was almost 2 feet across, and water dribbled down the sides. Worms were squirming at the bottom of the pit, trying to get away. Bean felt a little sorry for them, but Ivy just picked them up and dumped them into the bucket. Bean thought of Nancy kicking and waggling, and then she began dumping them into the bucket too. "How many do we need?" asked Bean. The worms were piled on top of one another in the bucket, at the bottom of the bucket. Ivy looked. "Only 10, but the more worms we have, the harder she'll dance." "This is enough," said Bean. "Poor worms." "All right," said Ivy. She looked toward Bean's house. "Let's go see if your sister is home." "Okay, but we'd better sneak," said Bean. Bean's house was good for sneaking. At the back, there was a porch. If you crawled like a bug across the porch, you could look through the big window in the kitchen. The girls ran toward the bushes that grew next to Bean's porch and ducked down hiding. Quietly, they began to creep up the stairs that led to the porch. Very quietly, they crawled across the floor, and then Bean heard a sound. She froze. There it was again, a sob. It was someone crying. Bean listened. It sounded like Nancy. Bean put her hand on Ivy's arm and pointed to the window. They crawled to it and peered in like spies. There was Nancy. She was sitting at the kitchen table. She was alone. She was crying. Bean got a funny feeling. Nancy was usually so bossy, so nosy, so sure she was right. It was weird to see her cry and all alone. "Maybe she's crying because she thinks you're lost," whispered Ivy. "That's kind of nice." Bean didn't answer. She had never thought she could make Nancy cry. Bean felt a lump in her throat. She remembered that Nancy let her snuggle into her bed when she had bad dreams about a spooky man. She remembered that Nancy let her play with her glass animals sometimes, even after she had broken the starfish. She remembered that Nancy had once bought her a fairy coloring book with her own money. Bean looked at the tears rolling down Nancy's cheeks. "Poor Nancy," Bean sniffed. Maybe she didn't want to put the dancing spell on her sister after all. Nancy said something. Bean couldn't hear it, but she was sure it was something about missing her. "What?" said Bean's mother's voice coming from another room. "Everybody has them," Nancy shouted. "Everybody but me. I'm the only one who has to wait." She began to cry harder. "What?" Bean pressed her face against the window. Her mother's voice said, "We've talked about this a million times. You can have them when you're 12. "Even some of stupid Bean's friends have them," yelled Nancy. Suddenly, Bean knew what Nancy was crying about. She's not sad about me at all. She's crying about pierced ears," hissed Bean to Ivy. Bean got mad, really mad. She was even madder than she had been when Nancy tried to drag her into the house. Bean was so mad she forgot all about being sneaky. She stood up and banged on the window with her fist. "You're a big turkey," she yelled. Excuse me. There she is, very mad. Nancy stared and then jumped back. Hey, Mom, Bean's back. Get in here, Bean breath. She flashed out the back door before Bean could even begin to run. In 2 seconds flat, she had Bean by the arm and was pulling her in the door. "Just wait till Mom gets a hold of you," she was saying. "You're going to be in so much trouble." "Stop," yelled Ivy. She stood in front of Nancy, waving the wand at her face. "I command you to free Bean." And that was the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called The Spell.